So youngest of five, not knowing quite yet what you want to do, and just like, this is cool. And
Yeah, the opportunity came when we planted the vines in 2007. I was in 7th grade, so didn't know what I was going to do for a living. But as this vineyard became less of a hobby and more of an actual business, it presented me the opportunity to get involved in the family business. And so I took advantage of it. I went to school at Washington State University for viticulture and enology, which is a fancy term for grape growing and winemaking. And spent
wait,
4
what were the
years,
two words again? Vintner and
viticulture and enology. So
okay.
basically spent 4 years in Washington State learning from some really prominent industry leaders in terms of winemaking and grape growing. And then came back here in 2016 and got an opportunity to go to South Africa for a harvest in 2017, which was a lot of fun. And
Wow.
then I've been here since.
Wow.
So yeah, we've grown the vineyard pretty substantially over the last several years.
So did your family buy the? Was there anything on this land, or did you?
It was a hobby farm for a long time. My grandfather and my grandmother immigrated from Eastern Europe. My grandfather was from Ukraine. My grandmother was from Germany. He went to Germany, got his medical degree, met my grandmother, and this was in the 1930s and 1940s.
Okay.
So, pretty tough times over there. So
Yeah.
they decided to come to America, and I was talking with my dad just a couple days ago. Like, they didn't know English. He didn't have a job. They had a kid that they left over there, and they came to America for the opportunity to start a new life. So it was definitely a big risk. But anyway, he settled in Waconia because back in the 1940s and 50s, it was rich in German population, so that easy to communicate, him being a doctor.
Yeah.
And he started a clinic here that would turn into what is now Lakeview Medical Center, Ridgeview Medical Center. Lakeview Clinic and Ridgeview. So
Yeah.
bought a lot of different properties. He bought this one in the 1970s, and we just had it as a hobby farm. My grandfather never lived here. He had various properties throughout the region, but when he died in the late 70s, my grandmother built the house, which is on site here, and then in the 80s, late 80s, my dad bought the property and the house from my grandmother, and born and raised. Was born in '94, and we had horses, we had dirt bikes, it was nothing about
What a blast.
farming
Right.
necessarily at that point, but
Yeah.
it wasn't until 2006 that the University of Minnesota came out with this new grape called Marquette, and that's when my stepmother and my dad were married. And she's an Italian lover of wine and pasta and cooking.
Yay.
And so my dad is German meat and potatoes, doesn't know anything about wine, actually preferred beer at that point.
Right.
But we had this beautiful property, and he planted almost every single tree that you see here with the help of my grandfather. So it kind of combined these two passions.
Yeah.
Growing stuff and wine. And so they said, let's take it as an opportunity to start a project together. So that's what happened in '07. We planted 100 vines right here. So each row is about 45 vines here. So it was a pretty small planting. And then 2008, we planted the rest of what you see kind of right in front of us. It was about 5 acres. And opened our doors in 2011 to the public. And kind of grew from there. Now we're at 35 acres of grapes, which is the largest vineyard and winery in the state. And
really?
Yeah, if you see behind those tree lines, we've got another 10 acres over there.
Right.
We got 10 acres over on that side. And we have some properties that we rent out around the area. So it's a pretty substantial amount, to say the least. We're at almost 20,000 vines on the ground. So all of them need meticulous hand management.
And you do it all by yourself, just
I mean, there's some help that comes along with it, but it's sometimes it can get a little monotonous.
Yeah. So these are the oldest of the vines right here.
For the most part,
Yeah.
There's been replacements because things have died off, or the winter injuries kind of killed the main trunk, so we bring up a new trunk from the roots and kind of replace them through that. So these are all pruned already. I just have them hanging in the wire because it's but we can walk through there and kind of show you the pruning process.
Yeah, that
and
would
what we're
be
looking for in a vine. I could have, had I known you were coming, probably left a vine or two
Oh, that's okay.
unpruned,
No.
but here we are. So,
That's all right.
yeah, the main idea, a couple of your questions to kind of base this interview off of was, why do we prune? Prune out the bad shoots so that you can have good fruit from that. And really it comes down to balance. We can kind of go down, maybe it's a good example here. So, excuse me. This vine is, relatively probably 7 or 8 years old as that trunk, but the vine itself is probably 15 years old at this point. And so there's kind of this idea of creating balance in a vine.
Okay.
And what that means is you don't want to have, because each one of these little nodes right here
Mm-hmm.
is going to produce 3 shoots.
Okay.
And each one of these shoots is going to produce 2 clusters of grapes.
Okay.
And so you start adding that up, you get 3, 6, 9, 12, 14. We got a good amount of fruit there.
Yeah.
But we don't want to overwhelm the plant with 100 clusters of fruit right there.
Oh.
So we want
Because
to
it's like
create the
doing
balance.
too much. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just
you're
like,
doing too
yeah.
much. You want to be able to have enough leaf structure to supply the energy for those grapes.
Got it.
And vice versa. You don't want to have too little fruit because then the vine will just grow really rapidly with 1 or 2 shoots.
Sure.
So
sure.
the balance idea is what we do, and you can see it's pretty dramatic what we cut off. All of this stuff was last year's growth, and next year's fruit comes from last year's growth.
Got it.
So
Got
this was last year's growth. We'll get next year's fruit, or this upcoming year's fruit,
From there.
from that bud right there. And so if you pull this back, I mean, you can see how
Oh, yeah.
dramatic
Yeah.
that is. And over the next few weeks, I'll be kind of pulling these vines out of the wires here.
Yeah.
And it's really about creating structure in the vine
Sure.
and creating a they call it a fruit zone.
Okay.
And so all the fruit is going to be right in that same zone.
Yeah.
And creating balanced fruit, which if you have balanced fruit, you have good fruit.
Okay.
If you have a balanced vine, you have a good vine.
So what does that do to the wine or the grapes themselves if you have too much or if you have too little?
Too little,
Are
yeah.
the grapes, is it just a volume thing or is there a taste in the grape
It
itself?
affects the quality for sure. If
Okay.
you have too much, you're not having enough leaf structure to supply the sugar
yeah.
to those grapes. There's
Sure.
not enough photosynthetic activity. So you end up with lower sugar, really high acid, some, components of the wine that would probably be not as desirable. So, off aromas possibly. And then if you have too much, then you're just not maximizing your vine. If you have too little fruit, and you're not maximizing your vine at
Sure.
that point. So,
Sure.
yeah, you could get the fruit to ripen off for sure, but you want to maximize your vine that you
Right.
have.
Right. Right. Not do too much, too little. The
Exactly.
balance is always
Exactly.
the key between
Yep.
the two. Yeah. Is there a certain? What do you look for in terms of the certain branches you're wanting to prune off of the main vine?
Strong, healthy branches, and over the years, these vines have endured. 2019 was one of the coldest years we had, minus 35 degrees for
Yeah.
72 straight hours. And over time, that may not have killed the vine outright, but it adds a lot of injury and damage to it.
Okay.
And so you can see, in a lot of these vines down the rows that I'm replacing the main trunk that clearly looks like it's 10 years old with some younger stuff. And this is an example of something that I did last year or the year before. This is a little bit younger, and I'll tie him down, and eventually we'll replace this entire trunk with this new one because there's a lot of built-up scar tissue in the xylophone and xylem and phloem is what they're called, the vascular tissue in the
vine.
plants. And
Okay.
so basically after a number of winters it'll kind of fail. So we're trying to replenish that, but also look for fruitful shoots that will provide a good harvest for the upcoming year.
Sure. And during when it's in the process of producing fruit and the leaf structure is being formed, do you come through and go, this doesn't look good, and you cut it off like the Bible verse says? You know, do you prune that piece off?
Yeah, I mean, you can see on the ground right there.
Yeah.
Plenty of non-looking good.
But you're doing
shoots, but
that all year long.
All year long, and especially in the summer too. You know, there's the reason these are called catchwayers.
Okay. Yep.
They catch the vines as they grow up, and as they grow up, we want to maximize the sun onto the clusters, because basically the grapes themselves we're trying to harvest as much sunlight as possible, because that ripens the fruit, it metabolizes the acid. So there's a lot of reasons why we do that, and so we're constantly cutting out, you know, dead leaves or leaves that are providing too much shading. We're cutting out shoots that are providing too much shading, and things that maybe aren't fruitful. There's plenty of shoots that might not be fruitful, so we'll cut those out because they're not too functional, really.
Yeah, so it's like, get out of the way. We got
exactly. Yeah.
we got
but
some.
There's plenty of dead wood that you know, it's a lot of hand-on management, and
yeah.
picking the good stuff out is only done by hand. So
Yeah, that's good. Wow, that's amazing. Amazing process.
Yeah, and if you guys wanted, we can go to a couple rows where I pulled the vines, and maybe you'll get a better visual of how much we cut off.
Yeah, I mean, this is awesome, because like I would have never thought that balance is like the key to a healthy vine. You know, I always thought, and what do I know, but like, let it grow, like get more and more and more, but oftentimes it's less is more. Simplicity on the vine.
Exactly.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, maybe the same is true in life, right?
Yeah. I wonder,
Less
is there
is
an
more.
application here?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to be said for life lessons that you can learn from a vineyard and growing grapes and making wine.
Sure.
And you know, like I mentioned, we got Bible verses on every single one of our wines that pertain to either wine reference or vineyard reference. And you, being a pastor, probably know more than anybody about how many references there are to vines and wine in the Bible, because it's so relevant. Yeah. And you know, it's so easy to understand in terms of life and you know, the references that it brings along with that. So these are obviously pulled, so a little bit more dramatic in terms of you can see the difference of.
The extras gone.
And I still have to come and tie these down a little bit, but you know, you can see this guy right here, very young. He'll turn into something like that in the next couple of years, but each one of these buds is going to produce a shoot, and then over the next couple of years, this will become a lot more fruitful.
Sure.
So
this is all from the same root system. It's just
exactly.
This is the old vine that
I mean,
now we're transitioning.
You can see how much damage that brown stuff. I cut that out this year. It's probably sitting over there. That is a severe amount of damage, and it just wasn't going to be fruitful this year. So cutting out the bad wood and letting the good wood grow so we can have a good harvest.
Yeah. God, that's a little bit of a life.
Yeah. No kidding.
Like those things in your life that are like, okay, what's clouding my essential fruit? You know, what can I get rid of so that what I am good at, or how God's wired me, or my walk isn't interrupted by other things that just don't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a fun part of the vineyard growing, because I myself am a Christian, and I get life lessons taught to me every single year when I'm doing this. And, but it is quite enjoyable, to say the least.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. I love it.
Anything else?
What's the, is there, like you said, 2019 was so cold that it was damaging the vines. Is there like a perfect balance of seasonality or temperature that really, because the season was like this, we know that the batch coming from there is going to be a good wine?
Yeah, I mean, we want it hot and dry when it's growing. So, This year it's going to be kind of unique. The last couple of years have been very good, to say the least. We've had drought years, which might be a harm to a lot of the corn and soybean farmers, but for us it's been actually a benefit, because when you stress out that vine, it brings out more flavor and ripens off the fruit more.
So stress brings out better flavor.
Yep, that's why.
That's a little application.
You go to, Washington State or California, those rarely get any rain in the summer.
Yeah.
And they're really hot and they're really dry, and they
Right.
produce some of the best wines in the world. What's unique about this is, we don't have any irrigation. We're totally reliant on the nature of the environment that year. So
Oh yeah,
the weather patterns, we don't have any drip lines. So that creates uniqueness from year to year,
Right.
and allows, certain years to be called a vintage, if you will.
Mhm.
And there's, a lot of different flavors that can be expressed from a cool year versus a warm year, wet year, dry year,
Sure.
vice versa. So this year is going to be interesting. I'm not quite sure how I'm feeling. Ask me in May, and it's a little too warm. I'm in shorts, and it's not even the middle of March. So
Right.
it's going pretty quick. We need to cool down a little bit in order to prevent things from budding out too early, and then possibly being susceptible to frost. So that is kind of going to be our main concern this year. But there's challenges every year. There's benefits to a lot of years for sure.
Yeah.
And that's the fun part about growing vines is, every year is different, and
Yeah.
you get challenges, but you get the fruits of your labor really, literally at the end of the year are
Worth
the
it.
benefit for sure.
Yeah. So 30 plus acres, 20,000 vines, whatever it is, and how much production on average does that render?
Yeah, so we
Again,
have
on average, I know some years are.
Yeah, there's fluctuations for sure. Once vines get into a full yielding age, they're probably doing around 3.5 to 5 tons per vine or per acre.
Okay.
And there's different varieties that give different volumes. So
Okay.
we have some white varieties that give 5 tons. Marquette is what we're looking at right now. This does probably about 3 tons an acre. So
Okay.
put it into scientific forms and volume forms, a ton will give you 150 gallons, and every gallon gives you 5 bottles of wine. So if you got 3 tons an acre, you're looking at about 750 bottles of wine out of that acre. So
Sure.
it can fluctuate a little bit, of course, depending on the vine and the year and the growing season. But total, we're not all in full production. We have some vines that were planted just a few years ago, so they're not quite there yet. But we're doing, when it is full production, it'll be about 100,000 gallons of wine.
Okay. And how many, like an average vine? Well, let me back it up. One bottle.
Yep.
How many grapes, vines, clusters?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I
know
think
everybody's going to ask
I think I
that.
backed this up one time. So I think it's about 4 or 5 pounds of grapes
Okay.
will go into a bottle. I would have
Somewhere
to do some math backwards again.
Yeah.
150 gallons, so what you get out 3 tons, and then you figure out what you can get out of the bottle. So.
And then maybe the last question. So it does take some aging before a vine actually produces a usable crop. Is that like 3 years, 5 years?
Yeah, about 3 years.
3 years,
Yep,
okay.
3 years, you'll get, generally speaking, your first crop.
Okay.
And that first crop's pretty small in terms of overall yield. And then 5 years is kind of when you max out.
Okay.
And you stay at that yield pretty
All right.
consistently.
So it takes time to bear fruit.
It does, yeah, and it's a patient process. And if you think about this, you plant the vine, you get 3 years. If it's a red grape, say you harvest it year 3 or year 4, then you barrel age that wine for a year, then you maybe possibly bottle age it for another year. So you're looking at 5 to 7 years before you get a product out of what you planted. So it's it takes a lot of patience, and it's taught us a lot of patience for sure.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth it when it's all said and done.
Sure. Yeah, because so you're the first vines are less than 20 years old. So you kind of do that math. It's only been well, I guess you get a harvest, but it's as vineyards go, it sounds like it's a youngish vineyard.
Relatively speaking, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, but Marquette was established in 2006, so it's some of the first vines of Marquette.
True. Yeah.
But yeah, relatively speaking, there's vineyards in Europe and in California that are 7,500 years old
Yeah. Yeah.
and have been run by the same family for that's entire time. So especially as you get into Europe, there's some really long family heritage in some of those vineyards and wineries too.
Sure. Sure. Awesome. Well, you can't beat the view either.
Right.
Holy
Yeah.
cow.
Yeah. Aesthetically pleasing, but also extremely functional. believe it or
Yeah.
not. So
Yeah.
all that we're 150 feet up from that water right now. So all that cold air in the frost season, May, Mother's Day usually, sinks down into the lake. And then
Nice.
the reverse happens in the fall. The warm water kicks up the temperature of our vineyard an extra 2 or 3 degrees in the October months, and we get an extra 2 or 3 weeks compared to any other vineyard in this area.
Wow.
South-facing slopes, direct sunlight. As you can see, the sun's maximum sun exposure if you're facing south in the
Yeah.
northern hemisphere. So
Yeah.
it's the ideal location for growing grapes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow, this is gold. I mean, not only just what you said, but just being on the vineyard. And,
Well,
yeah.
it's quite nice to enjoy it for sure.
Yes, for sure.
Have a glass of wine and walk through the vines, and that's what a
Yeah.
lot of people like doing on the weekends, is coming out here,
Yep.
just experiencing a little piece of paradise, which
Yep.
is hopefully an escape for a lot of people, but it brings a lot of joy to offer this to the public, and yeah, it's nothing I would ever give away, that's for sure.
Nice. Well, thank you, sir.
Of course.
Thanks
Yeah,
for showing
my
us
pleasure.
the vines, taking off some time.